Hey everyone, Aaron here from MTGChallengers, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering deck tech. Today I'll be going over a Born of the Gods update for Mono Blue Devotion. So this deck almost hasn't changed at all since the release of Born of the Gods. In fact, there's only one new card in here. I just wanted to cover it because it's still seeing considerable play, and I thought it would be interesting to see how well it's going to do against some of the newer Born of the Gods decks. So let's get started with the creatures in ascending order. First off, I have Cloudfin Raptor as a 4-of. It's really nice to have in this deck as a turn 1 evasive play. Every single other creature in the deck will evolve it, so it's going to be able to swing in for damage on turn 2 the vast majority of the time, and it can get considerably larger as the game goes on. And I have another 1-drop, Judge's Familiar, a playset here as well. It's just another really solid evasive 1-drop. The Raptor is more ideal on turn 1, but a Familiar instead still isn't bad at all, and the sacrifice ability isn't to be underestimated. At 4 mana, Master of Waves can be vulnerable to counterspells, and sacrificing a Familiar to allow a Master to resolve is certainly worth it, since it's only going to take 1 devotion away from you. And the same goes for Thassa, since counter magic is one of the only ways she can be dealt with. Onto the 2-drops, I have 4 copies of Frostburn Weird. A really awesome creature for this deck. Aside from the 2 devotion it provides, it's good in several ways. First, the 4 toughness means it will evolve Cloudfin Raptor time and time again if you draw multiples, and the pump ability makes it really versatile. On its raw stats, it dodges Lightning Strike and Bile Blight, and being able to make it a 2/3 is just perfect against a lot of the aggressive decks, since you'll be able to kill their 2-powered creature while still staying alive. So it's great against things like Burning Tree Emissary, Ash Zealot in particular because it gets around the first strike, and Voice of Resurgence. And if you're attacking into an empty board, you can make it a 4/1 and really push through some considerable damage. The other 2-drop I have in here is Tidebinder Mage, 4 copies of it as well. Another really good creature, good with devotion due to the mana cost of course, and the ability to tap down a red or green creature is really good right now, since Gruul Monsters is really seeing serious play, and this can tap down basically any creature they play. And due to a lot of creatures being multicolored, it also hits a lot of other really good decks, like Green-White Aggro, Boros, and Jund, since it will tap down things like Voice of Resurgence, Boros Reckoner, and Reaper of the Wilds. If you're up against a control deck with little to no creatures, or a deck that just doesn't play any red or green creatures, it's pretty obviously the target for siding Game 2, but most of the time you will get a lot of use out of it. Now onto the 3-drops, I have 4 Nightveil Specter. An obvious choice due to mainly the really nice 3 devotion it provides. It's also an evasive body with 3 toughness, which is also good. And then there's the exile ability, which really doesn't come into play all that much. It usually just ends up being able to play lands to use for generic mana, but if it does happen to be like an Aetherling or something, then that's definitely pretty nice to be able to cast. And even if it's something I can't cast, I know my opponent doesn't have it. Then I have one of the main win conditions of the deck, Thassa, God of the Sea, a playset of her, of course. At 3 mana, she's just insane. Scrying at the upkeep is awesome since it's before the draw, so you can really have a lot more control over the card you draw each turn. Honestly, I can't recall how many times her scrying ability has actually just won me the game, since it digs through the deck so well. Beyond that, she will be a creature a significant bit of the time, since 5 devotion in a deck with a ton of 2 and 3 intensive cost creatures really isn't very much at all. And when she becomes one, you can use her unblockable ability on herself, and just 5 them every turn until you win. Then I have the final creature in the deck, as well as the other main win condition for Master of Waves. Just an awesome card as well. By turn 4 or 5, you'll really have a large amount of devotion piled up that you'll be able to take advantage of. You'll just create a bunch of 2/1s. They are pretty vulnerable, since if the Master is taken out, the tokens will die as well, since they're naturally 1/0s, so they'll die based on a state-based action. But the good thing about it is that your opponent really only has 1 turn to find that answer before they die. And if you get multiples out, they're going to be in a world of hurt, since not only will you get more than twice the amount of tokens, but there'll be 3 2s, since each Master gives them +1/+1. The protection from red is reasonably good. It protects against Gruul Monsters and Boros, and of course against red removal like Lightning Strike and Mizzium Mortars. He definitely winds up being the card that wins a lot of the games. So that's it for the creatures. Now on to the other spells I have in the deck. I'm playing 2 Rapid Hybridization. Mono Blue really needs some removal, and this is probably the best removal spell it has right now. It gets rid of Blood Baron of Vizkopa and Stormbreath Dragon, cards that are by their nature really difficult to remove due to the protection. It also deals with Boros Reckoner really well, giving them a vanilla 3-3 rather than a 3-3 that can redirect damage and get first strike is definitely a lot better. Up against aggressive decks, I'll usually side them out, since they of course are going to be running a lot of little creatures, so a 3-3 would actually be better for them. But it's really awesome up against the mid-range creature decks to get rid of their huge guys. Then I have one Cyclonic Rift. It's a decent way to delay your opponent a turn. It's a one-of just because it's not exactly removal. All you're doing is trading a card for them not being able to play a card until a turn later, which isn't exactly optimal. And I just like Rapid Hybridization more in this meta, but it can clear out that annoying blocker to let you swing in for lethal, and in the late game it can be overloaded to great effect. Then I have the only Born of the Gods card in here, Fated Infatuation. I have 2 copies of it. As soon as I saw it in the spoiler, I knew it had the potential to be really awesome in Mono Blue. The best thing you can do with it is to copy Master of Waves. Doing it in response to like a removal spell is a really big blowout, since you'll get more tokens as well as save the existing ones, since you'll still get the +1/+1 from the copy. Or you can swing in with the tokens from the first master and copy it at instant speed before damage to buff the tokens for lethal. There's just a lot of really cool ways that it interacts with Master of Waves. Also, another really cool thing you can do with it is to copy Mutavault. Since Mutavault is still a land when it's animated, you'll get another Mutavault which can then be tapped for more mana and animated to bash in for even more damage. And the final spell I have is Bident of Thassa, 2 copies here. The main weakness of aggressive decks is the lack of card advantage, and this definitely alleviates that problem very nicely. It's not uncommon for you to play it and then draw 2 or 3 cards off of it immediately, and that will only get greater since we have a lot of creatures with evasion. The second ability on it really isn't used much, but it can be pretty good against aggro and mid-range decks. So aggro, if you are on the play, their life total is probably lower than yours, so you can force an attack to have a free swing for lethal next turn. And against mid-range, if they're trying to stall the game out with their big creatures to stabilize, you can disrupt that plan really easily. And if nothing else, it's just another 2 devotion since it's a permanent. So that's it for the spells. Moving on to the mana base. It's really simple. I have 4 Mutavault, which is just incredible in this deck. Since it is a monocolored deck, the generic mana really won't interfere at all, and it's just another creature that will swing in for damage, which is the #1 thing an aggressive deck wants to do. And like I said before, it can also be copied with Fated Infatuation, and it's also really awesome with Master of Waves. Since it has all creature types, that includes Elemental, so it will be buffed to a 3-3 or a 4-4, depending on how many Masters you have out. Then I have 1 Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, just kind of thrown in here just to have it. It's not necessary at all for the deck to win, it's just nice to draw it to really be able to race the other devotion decks in the format that rely on it more heavily. And then I just have 20 basic islands for a total of 25 lands. It's a really nice amount to always have enough mana for my 4-drops, as well as Aetherling in the side, which I'll get to in a minute. So that's it for the main board, let's move on to the sideboard. First off, I have a second Nykthos in the side, mainly sided in against other devotion decks that are going to be using it a lot, so I need to be able to race them in that regard. Then I have 2 copies of Aetherling, mainly against control decks, which can be troublesome with this deck. Their goal is to stall the game out, so Aetherling is an awesome way to mess up that plan. If it resolves with mana open, there's very little they can do beyond a board wipe, and they will most likely lose that game. Next, I have 2 Mizzium Skin. Good against mono black and Jund, decks that are running a lot of spot removal. Protects my creatures, which is great for preserving my devotion, especially if I'm relying on Thassa to win. I also have a 3rd Rapid Hybridization in the side, mainly against, again, Gruul and Jund monsters, and also Orzhov to take out their Pelucranoses, Stormbreath Dragons, Blood Barons, Desecration Demons, stuff like that. In those cases, a vanilla 3-3 is far better for me than the creature that they had. I have another 2 copies of Cyclonic Rift in the side. This can be really good in a variety of matchup, against aggro, again to take out their blockers, against mid-range for the same reason, and against control to take out their detention spheres and planeswalkers and stuff like that. Next, I have a playset of Gainsay. This should be pretty obvious against any deck running blue. blue-white control variants against their Detention Spheres, Aetherlings, Sphinx's Revelations, etc., and of course against the mirror matchups where it can counter literally every single spell that they're going to play. I also have 2 Dissolve, against the mid-range and control decks mainly, to be able to counter their big creatures and big spells that are going to be problematic for me, and scrying 1 on top of it is really nice. And finally, I have a single Jace, Architect of Thought. Against the control decks that rely heavily on him for card advantage, I can race them in that respect. Also, it's great against aggressive decks with his +1, because their attacks are going to be significantly dampered, and profitable blocks will be made quite a bit more commonplace. So that's it for this deck tech. Be sure to check out our others. To see these decks in action, check out our gameplays, and also be sure to check out our Facebook page for behind-the-scenes information regarding upcoming decks, gameplays, and other projects. Thanks for visiting, and if you like what you see, subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content.